Today we're going to be going through the abortion debate between Hayden, who's pro-life, and Dean, who's pro-choice.
What gives the life of the fetus moral value?
The fact that it is a living human organism.
Do you think that all innocent human life has an identical amount of value?
I would say that all innocent human organisms have a right not to be murdered.
Yes, but do they all have the identical amount of moral value? For instance, I'm as morally valuable as you are morally valuable as a fetus is morally valuable.
Well, when you're talking about value, that would be a different thing from a right to live. Would we agree on
It's
that?
the value that grants the right to life. If something isn't morally valuable, it's not going to have the right to life.
Sure, then I would be willing to say that a born human being has equal value to a preborn human being if we're talking about value being what we're using to define as having a right not to be murdered.
Perfect. So here's my question. There's a pew-pew to your head and two buttons in front of you. Button number 1 unalives 10 cryogenically frozen human zygotes that are biologically alive and are human. Button number 2 unalives 1 newborn. Which button are you pressing?
Why do I have to press one of the buttons?
Because if you don't press either of the buttons, everyone dies. 10 zygotes, 1 newborn, and you.
Yeah, so let's say that I was to say that I pushed the button that would ultimately result in the death of the newborn human being, which if I'm trying to preserve the maximum amount of living human organisms would be the route that I would want to take, right? Let's say that I choose to do that. Can you tell me how that would then justify abortion?
Jesus Christ.
Can you tell me how that would then justify abortion?
Why'd
you say if, as if that isn't the
No,
logical
well,
development?
at first I said if, and then I also said that I'm taking that position, and then I asked, how that would justify abortion.
So Hayden, we haven't gotten there yet.
Okay.
We haven't gotten around to my justification insofar as why I think that elective lethal abortions prior to a given point are morally permissible. The reason why I asked you this question is to demonstrate an absurdity. And in fact, the absurdity in this case would be that you'd value 10 cryogenically frozen unicellular organisms over a newborn.
The fact that I would value 10 living human organisms over 1 living human organism?
Yes.
So Hayden's position is that all living human organisms have an equal right to life. Dean obviously disagrees with this, and so he uses a thought experiment to test Hayden's consistency. The thought experiment is that you have 2 buttons. Button 1 is to kill 10 zygotes. Button 2 is to kill 1 newborn, and if you do nothing, you press neither button, then everyone dies. In order to remain consistent, Hayden would need to kill the newborn over the zygotes, and thus Dean responds by calling this position absurd. Then Hayden responds by saying that he's just killing 1 living human organism over 10 living human organisms, which if you do the math, it should be pretty obvious that's what you should do. Unless, of course, not all living human organisms have equal value. A zygote, for those unfamiliar, is roughly the size of a grain of salt, and it looks like this. It's a 1-cell organism that really can't do anything right now besides develop into something else that can do stuff. So when you look at that zygote and you compare it to a newborn, it seems like these things aren't equivalent in moral value. It seems absurd to say that you would choose a couple zygotes over a newborn when you really put the 2 in front of you. I could understand one reason as to why you might value zygotes, and that would just be the potential for what they could turn into. And so to see if this is what Hayden values, Dean asks him this.
If there was a human zygote that were to remain a human zygote for the rest of its existence and not grow into anything more, not have any potential or capacity for a higher level of rationale, etc., would you value it the same as you value yourself, or me, or Parker, or anyone else?
Yes.
Okay. Now please tell me why you should value a unicellular organism that will remain a unicellular organism insofar as determining that it's murder as long as it's a part of our species. Meanwhile, you don't think you're doing anything wrong when you brush your teeth and kill 400 trillion life forms that are of a similar size, standard, and growth potential as that unicellular organism.
Sure, so when I brush my teeth, I'm not killing any living human organisms. And if you reject the standard that all living human organisms are equally valuable and equally have a right not to be murdered, then I would argue you end up with some repugnant consequences. Now, the problem with your line of questioning here is that you still haven't established an absolute standard of rationality by which you're going to judge my answers or yours outside of your personal preference. And if your personal preference is the only standard you're judging my answers by, then all I have to do is judge your answers by my personal preference, and there is no ultimate arbiter, is there?
So Hayden, as I already described, when we want to use our preferences to determine what's absurd and what's not absurd, you're right, and that's why I'd classify that as a dead end. However, the absolute standard for rationale would just be the three consequential classical laws of logic, and we typically judge the internal validity of an argument based upon an internal contradiction given in another belief in which you hold to be true. So anyways, to go back to what I was saying, so you told me that you would value a unicellular organism that had no growth potential and would remain a unicellular organism for the rest of its existence as long as it's a part of our species. So tell me why similar genome, in the sense of the structure of our DNA, or I guess similar enough for biologists to classify as a part of your same species, is morally valuable. I find that to be insane, and I'd ask you for your reasons why.
So just to clarify the question again, so the reasoning why I would value a living human organism at the zygote stage, so the one-celled stage, versus other forms of one-cellular life.
That is the only stage it will exist in ever.
Yes, and you're asking me to compare that to the value of something that is also one cell but doesn't have unique human DNA, so something like a horse at the zygote stage or something like that?
Actually, no. The question that I'm asking you is why is DNA that is sufficiently similar to yourself to be categorized as a Homo sapien sapien grant moral value?
Because it's made in the image of God.
There we go.
I think this kind of shows why Hayden's position is so unappealing to those who already don't share his worldview. It'd be like someone of another religion telling a Christian, hey, you need to do this thing because my God tells us all that we need to do it. This is obviously not going to be very convincing to the Christian because they don't believe in that God. In the same way, if a Christian tells someone who's not a Christian that they need to value the DNA of this unicellular organism, when in no other situation do we value the DNA of unicellular organisms. In fact, we don't value it so much that we kill trillions a day and don't bat an eye. It's confusing, and we're like, what? Why would I care in this specific context? And you say, because my God says so. This is obviously not convincing. That concludes the analysis of Hayden's position for part 1 of this review. I'm going to be going over Dean and Parker's position on abortion in part 2, my next video.